Grande è la misericordia del Signore,
Great is the mercy of the Lord.
dice il Salmo.
That's what the Psalm says.
In questi giorni
In these days,
ho potuto leggere
I was able to read
un libro
a book
di un cardinale,
by a cardinal,
il cardinale Kasper, un
Cardinal
teologo
Kasper,
in gamba,
a very
buon teologo.
capable theologian.
Sulla misericordia.
It was about
E mi ha
mercy.
fatto tanto bene quel libro, ma
And
non
it did
credete
me
che faccio
such good.
pubblicità ai libri
But
dei miei
don't think that
cardinali,
I'm publicizing the
Non è
books of
così.
my cardinals. It's not like that.
ma mi ha fatto tanto bene.
But it was so
Tanto
good
bene.
for me to read that.
Il cardinale Kasper diceva
Cardinal Kasper said
che sentire misericordia, questa parola,
to feel mercy,
cambia
this word,
tutto.
it
È il
changes
meglio che
everything.
noi possiamo sentire.
The best we can feel
Cambia il mondo.
changes
Un po'
the
di
world.
misericordia
A little bit of
rende il
mercy
mondo meno freddo
makes the
e
world
più
less
giusto.
cold and more just.
Cardinal Kasper, thank you very much for joining us. Over the last few years, you've spoken a lot about mercy. You've written a book about mercy, you've traveled around the world talking about mercy, and even before the world knew Pope Francis and his pontificate being grounded in the virtue of mercy, you were talking a lot about it. Why? Why is mercy so important at this moment in human history?
Mercy is central and fundamental in Holy Scripture. Already in the Old Testament and in the message of Jesus himself, in many parables he spoke about mercy. It's the center of his message, and I think it's important in our days. There's a lot of suffering and crisis in this world. People are despaired, and people feel they need mercy from God, and they need also merciful neighbors. And therefore it's a very central theme, and I think it's a central task and mission of the Church to give testimony of and witness of mercy.
Considering that we have the Synod of Bishops starting, the Synod of Bishops on the family, this question of mercy is inevitably going to come up, and we'll also see many bishops from around the world speaking about their particular situations. This seems to be a time of expectation not only for the Church but for the whole world. What do you think humanity expects of the Catholic Church when it comes to this question of the Synod?
Well, the family is the cell of humankind, cell of our society, and also the cell of the Church. And family is a question for everybody, but family today are in many situations of crisis. It's a crisis in our Western society, which is often very anti-family, with labor, with economy and so on. But there's a crisis also in other parts of the world, in situations of persecution, of migration, and so on. And therefore, I think one expects now from the Church to speak about family, to give some guidance to people. There is also a lot of controversy. What is a family all about? There are many different conceptions today. The Catholic Church holds that family is a union of life and love of one man and one woman, together with their children, which are normally the offspring of this common life of men and women. And I think we have to say that's a good message for our world, but the Church has also to reflect how to help people to reach and to achieve the happiness of their life, because most of young people want happiness in the realm of a family life.
Let's talk a little bit about your book on mercy. You wrote a book on mercy, The Essence of the Gospel and the Key to Christian Life. And we heard very shortly after Pope Francis was elected, he gave you a public endorsement of your book in his first Angelus, and even written on the cover of the book, we see here that endorsement. This book, the Pope says, has done me so much good. Tell us the story. How did this book end up in the hands of Cardinal Bergoglio before the 2013 conclave?
Well, it's a very strange story, because 3 days before the conclave started, I got the Spanish translation of the book, And I thought, I know what is in the book, I have not to read it in Spanish, I know it from the German text. And so I took these copies with me to the conclave and thought I'd give it to some Spanish-speaking cardinals. And Cardinal Bergoglio had his room vis-à-vis my room, and I saw him under the door, and I said, oh, I have something for you. And I gave him the book, and he saw, oh, Misericordia, questo è il nome del nostro Dio. Mercy, that's the name of our God. And he was impressed, because it was already his theme, and it seems that he read the book during the conclave, and he gave this endorsement, yes, but I think it's not an endorsement only for me, it's for the whole idea of mercy, to make it public. That's important for today. But mercy is not cheap Christianity, or some think of this, it will be lesson or the commandments, the doctrines of God. No, mercy is a fundamental of all this, and people need today this message of Jesus, what is mercy.
You knew Cardinal Bergoglio before he was Pope Francis. You visited him in his home diocese. What changes have you seen in him since his election as Pope?
First of all, there is also continuity. He already, as Cardinal or Archbishop of Buenos Aires, he went also into slums, and the social dimension of his ministry was very central for him. And now in his apostolic writing about the joy of the gospel, gospel of joy, he repeats many things he had already said in Aparecida and this conference of the Latin American bishops, but there is also a change in him. I think he became younger than he was. He was before his emeritation in Argentina. Now he seems to be very young and very strong. Well, old men can be wise, and at the same time very young, often younger than young people are.
I think I see the same thing in Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI.
Oh, well, I think his decision to give up his pontificate was a very great step and a generous step. And I have a high esteem for him. And now also the relation between the Pope Emeritus and the Pope Francis is a very friendly and a good relation. I think it's a good example for a relation between predecessor and successor.
There's a huge expectation now in the run-up to this Synod of Bishops for the renewal of the synodal structure, how synods are done. People want to see maybe something new there. Synods have been around for 50 years. What has been lacking in the last 50 years that there's a desire for more in the synod?
Well, there was no real communication often in the synods. It was too formalistic with the speeches, to listen from the morning to the evening to speeches of 5 minutes. It's boring by the time. And when you listen to some different languages, you are also to forget what he first said. And therefore, the Pope wants more communication within the Synod. That's one point. And the second point is very important, especially when we speak about family. We have to listen to lay people who are living in this situation. And therefore, already the questionnaire should help to tell that people tell us what are their problems, what are their expectations. And since the Synod is not only 2-3 weeks, but there are two parts, two phases of the Synod. It's a synodical process, and after the Synod now in October, and there will be a whole year where the problem can be discussed on local level in the parishes, in the dioceses, in the bishops' conference, and then the bishops come back after having listened to all this and make, together with the Pope, their final decisions. So the whole Church is involved in this synodical process.
If you had a hope for this particular synod, I mean, obviously it's a process, as you said, and there's still much that has to happen. But for this first synod, what are your expectations? What are your hopes?
Well, first of all, a serene atmosphere, not an atmosphere of a fierce debate. And then I hope that there will be honest discernment what happens, what is the problem, what are the desires, what need our people today, and what need also our pastors in the church. And so a real assessment, honest assessment of reality. Often we are in the danger to have an ideology or utopian vision. The reality is very, very different. I'm coming from a Catholic region in Germany, but the pastor tells me when he gathers all the parents of the children which are prepared for First Communion, less than 50% live in a regular situation. And we cannot exclude all these people if it's the half of them. And if we exclude the parents from Holy Communion, also the children will not go to Holy Communion. We forget the next generation. And I think that's not a good pastoral tactic, strategy we have at this moment. And we have to take people as they are and where they are, then to accompany them on their way to Christian life. And I think the image of way is a pilgrimage is very essential to the biblical understanding of the people of God.
There seems to be in the middle of the debate a lot of fear, a fear of what might be lost, what might be changed. What do you think is at the root of that fear, and how do we have that honest and open and serene dialogue with people who are coming from all these different perspectives?
That's a different kind of fear. That's a doctrinal fear that we give up the church doctrine, the binding doctrine of the indissolubility of marriage, for example. But I do not know any bishop who would likes to give up this doctrine. It would not be for the good of the people to give it up. But the problem is how to adapt, how to apply this doctrine to concrete and contingent and complex situation of human life. That's the problem, not the doctrinal level, it's the pastoral level. A second fear is as a kind of domino theory. If you change one thing, not in the doctrine, but in the pastoral practice, all will collapse. I think that's an ideological image of the church. The church doctrine is not such an ideological system. It's the good news of the gospel, and the gospel, in the center of the gospel is this message of mercy. And there cannot be any situation in human life where you fall in a hole and there is no way out. God is always some new chance if people want and people cry, if people pray. And if God is merciful, the church should be also merciful to them. The church is a sacrament of mercy.
I remember studying the Second Vatican Council when Pope John XXIII gave his opening address at the council, and he said the church at this moment in time has to practice mercy above all else.
Yes, that's...
how significant was that historically for the Pope at that time to be giving that message, and what does it mean that we seem to be here again 50 years later?
Yes, I think John XXIII sets a tone for the council and for the whole post-conciliar era we are now. And Pope Paul VI, who will be beatified at the end of this first phase of the Synod, repeated the same thing. He said the paradigm of the spirituality of the council is the parable of the good Samaritan. The Samaritan who goes down to the street, to the dirt of the street and helps a man, and the man who needs his help is a concrete interpretation of what is the will of God in his situation. And then this is a paradigm shift to look to people, to see from the viewpoint of people and of those who suffer to the reality, and then look to them from the viewpoint of the gospel.
You mentioned Pope Paul VI in the context of his beatification. What do you think his significant contribution was in the implementation of the council and the bringing the council to conclusion and the message of the council? I mean, you mentioned that he continued the line. Talk to us a little bit about Paul VI, because many people sometimes forget how influential and important he was in continuing these things in the church.
He was very important for the implementation of the Synod in the liturgical life of the Church. We had this renewal of all sacraments, especially of Holy Eucharist. And second one, his first encyclical was about dialogue within the Church. He wanted a dialogical Church, and he had a very important message about the social doctrine, Populorum Progressio. I think that's a very important document for our situation of today in a globalized world, how to come to a world of peace, of justice in such crisis we have at this moment. And so I think he's a very prophetic voice, and also for family life. His encyclical Humane Vitae is often interpreted only from one chapter, but his main approach to family and to marriage was a personalistic view, and he was the first pope who saw family and saw marriage in this personal way, and therefore we have to interpret this encyclical from this central viewpoint, and so I think it's a very important pope. Unfortunately, he was forgotten, and I hope we will now make anew clear how important he was, and he set the tone for the whole post-conciliar era.
You've been a bishop for many years. You were made bishop under Pope John Paul II, who was a great advocate for mercy and for divine mercy. What's the connection between what John Paul II, now St. John Paul II, wanted to say about mercy, the message that he wanted to bring to the world, and the message of mercy that you share with the world?
Well, I think John Paul II had a very deep experience of all the suffering in our world in the 20th century. He grew up in Poland during the Nazi time, during the Second World War, during the time of Shoah, and then the communist period, and he knew what sufferings are there, and this was the root from where he spoke about mercy, and he discovered especially his sister Faustina Kowalska, who had this vision about mystical experience about mercy. He made her a saint. It was the first canonization of the Jubilee year 2000, and therefore it has a significative, it has a symbolic meaning, this canonization of John Paul II. And so Pope Francis is in the line with all his predecessors, with Pope John XXIII, Pope Paul VI, Pope John Paul II, and now Benedict, first encyclical about God is love. So it's a very important continuity here in the post-conciliar church.
You found yourself at this particular moment right at the heart of a major debate. I'm just wondering, you're retired President Emeritus of the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity. Do you feel more free because you're now in retirement and you can speak openly about these things?
No, about the problem of family I spoke already when I was still in the academic life, and then when I was Bishop of Rottenburg, Stuttgart in Germany. It's not a new theme for me, but now it became relevant through Pope Francis, and he asked me to give this conference to the cardinals. It was not my personal initiative, it was his will. And I did it, and I spoke twice before the conference with him about the general lines of the conference, and I had the impression he was afterwards pleased about the conference, and so I think I did what a cardinal has to do. He's a cooperator of the Pope. And those who are against what I said, well, they have to ask where they are standing.
If you look at the debate objectively as it's going on now, I mean, you're right in the middle of it, but if we step back a little bit, how do you assess the way the debate is going about? Is there anything being lost in the way the debate is going about?
Well, I'm not so happy about the public debate because all is reduced now to one problem about divorced and remarried people. That's one problem. It's an urgent problem, especially in our Western world, but it's not the only problem. There are many other problems. So this does not please me to concentrate all to one point and to look to this point only from a doctrinal point of view. I think we have to start to see the reality, how people live, what are their sufferings, what are their desires, and then to make a discernment of the spirits in the light of the gospel and come to our decisions. We cannot have only a doctrinal vision, an abstract ideological vision of the problem.
Did you ever imagine that you would find yourself at the center of a major debate like this? That's at a crucial historical moment in the life of the Church?
No, I did not imagine this because I was for 25 years in the academic world. And so it's normal to have a debate, and I think now everybody is free to express his opinion, and also a different opinion from mine, but now the Synod should not be an ideological or doctrinal debate as we have in the academic world, but it should be in a serene atmosphere, an exchange of pastoral experience, of arguments, and then in an atmosphere of prayer and an atmosphere of listening to one another, come to decisions. And this means to listen to what the Spirit has to say to the churches today.
The synodal experience, especially as it came out of the Second Vatican Council, was intimately connected with the question of ecumenism, and you've worked in the world of ecumenism for a long time, for many years. What effect do you think this renewed synodal process will have on ecumenism today?
But the synods are very important for the Orthodox Church, and they are also in a different sense important for the Protestant churches. And so to enforce the synodical life in our own church is already point of coming closer together with other churches, and helps also for ecumenism, because ecumenism cannot be done to impose our view to the others. It has to be done in dialogue, in a dialogical form. And I think, and so it's also the vision of Pope Francis, that he speaks about unity within diversity and diversity within unity. The unity of the Church we want and we desire, it cannot be uniformity. And so we need the whole richness, and this means the whole Catholicity of the Church.
I'd like to ask you just one more question about mercy. I remember as a theology student, sometimes I'd be listening to a lecture and I'd be thinking to myself, I haven't a clue what's going on here or what's being said. You've spent your life in academia, you're a teacher, you're a professor, you're a theologian. If there's a message from the gospel about mercy that the world needs today, what would you say and how would you say it to the people of today who are not theologians but just regular people trying their best in the situations that they find themselves in?
Well, I would say God is even greater, that we think about Him, and God gives a chance to everybody who wants to have this chance. God is with us in all suffering, in every situation. Nobody is definitively lost. God doesn't abandon us, and we do not abandon Him. And therefore it's good news. It's a gospel message, a good news for everybody, and I think the Church has to give witness of this good news, not of commandments only, but God is for you. God says yes to you in every situation, and therefore we can hope for it every time.
Cardinal Kasper, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts today.